Hey, what's up? This is David Draymond from the band Disturbed, and you're listening to The Allan Handelman Show.
Could you imagine being told that you probably have a year or two to live? Boy, this song has a whole new significance, this old Dylan song, which was part of the very last album from Warren Zevon called The Wind. Listen to a little of this and just hear it in his voice. It has a whole different impact. We'll talk to Warren Zevon's wife and Peter Christ, law enforcement against prohibition. We don't get mellow on this show too often, but I'll tell you, I've never heard a version of Bob Dylan's Knocking on Heaven's Door more potent than that. Warren Zevon from The Wind, his last album, and what can I say? Crystal Zevon, thanks for being here again.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
You're doing great, and I know I'm asking you questions that's, in a sense, asking you to relive stuff, and I apologize for that, but thank you for bringing us along on that journey. I know it's tough.
You know, it's funny. I had some real reluctance about going back and reliving stuff, but I've realized that what it allowed me to do was kind of make peace with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in some ways this book is a cautionary tale. I've had a lot of people, I've been getting a lot of mail from people who've had problems with alcoholism or different kinds of abuse, or if Warren suffered from obsessive-compulsive disorder. And, people writing and telling their stories and saying how much it helped them to read this. So I never thought that would be the case.
How would he manifest that disorder? I mean, what was the behavior like that produced?
Oh, there were a lot of ways. I mean, when we were first together, nobody knew what obsessive-compulsive disorder was. So, we just thought Warren was weird. But things like he always had to wear one color. It was gray for all the last years of his life. When we were together, it was blue, and before I knew him, it had been green. But once he was done with a color, nothing of that color would be in his life again.
Really?
Or it would be bad luck. A lot of it was about good luck and bad luck.
Interesting.
He drank, after he stopped drinking alcohol, he drank Diet Coke or Diet Mountain Dew, and he would sometimes flip the lid on the flip thing. What do you call it?
Yeah, the cap.
On the can.
Right. Or the tab.
He would go through, 4, 5, 6, sometimes 10 cans before he could find the lucky one. And it had to do with the way it sounded or just the way it flipped open.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He collected gray Calvin Klein T-shirts and left them in their packages. Just very odd things.
So he'd be into a color for a while, and then he'd get tired of it. Go on. You were mentioning other stuff. That's interesting.
Well, I was going to say, Warren had a fascination with guns, which started when we were married, and actually had something to do with the fact that our marriage ended, because I did not share the same fascination with loaded guns and drunk people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So he and Billy Bob Thornton became friends. They lived in the same apartment building in Los Angeles before Billy Bob Thornton was well known. And one day Warren went down to where the bank of mailboxes were, and Billy Bob was taking the letters in and out of his mailbox, obviously a prescribed number of times. And Warren walked up to him and said, "Oh, so you do that too? You got it too?" And they began to compare, things that they would do, and sort of had a contest to see who had it worse. But then when Warren said to Billy one day, "Well, so you got this with guns?" Billy said, "You win. I don't have it with guns." But Warren, even down to playing Russian roulette a time or two in his life. So it was a strange experience.
And boy, she doesn't hold back in this book. The great stuff, and it's told by people who knew him best. The name of the book is "I'll Sleep When I'm Dead: The Dirty Life and Times of Warren Zevon." Let's talk a little bit about specific songs and the story behind the songs. And there's so many. Let's see what this one here. Oh yeah. Yeah, Excitable Boy. I guess after hearing what you're talking about, it's kind of self-explanatory, but maybe tell us the story behind the story of this song.
Warren loved. I used to make this pot roast, and I cooked it in onion soup with lots of brandy in it, and he one Sunday I was making a pot roast dinner, and he was all excited, and he went up and he got dressed up in his one white dress shirt, and came down to dinner, and he took a bite of the pot roast, and he just, he would do this kind of thing sometimes. He just got very excited, and he jumped up on the table, he grabbed a fistful of pot roast, and ripped open his shirt, and rubbed the pot roast on his chest. Now, this was, and danced around the room, and then we went on with dinner. It wasn't all that unusual, to be honest. But then the next day we went down to our friend Roy Marinelle's, and he happened to be cooking a pot roast. And so Warren told him, Crystal made such a good pot roast last night, I had to rub it on my chest. And Roy said, well, you're just an excitable boy, Warren. And they both looked at each other, and their eyes lit up.
That's a great story. That's a great story. All right, here, since we're talking about some of these hits, how about Lawyers, Guns, and Money?
Oh, well, that's a song that was written in Hawaii. He was on a break. He had recorded the second album, and thought he was done, and Waddy Wachtel was one of the co-producers. Waddy and Jackson Browne produced it together, and Waddy said no, there were two songs that didn't belong on that album, and Warren needed two more songs. So he decided he needed a break, and went with one of the a guy who worked for the record company, a guy named Bert Stein, to Hawaii. And I stayed home. I had Ariel and stayed home with Ariel. And, he was drinking his usual amount of, probably a couple quarts of vodka a day.
Wow.
Hanging out in the cocktail lounge, and met a waitress. And she said she had a friend who had a cabin up in the mountains. They could go up there and see what it was like up in the mountains in Hawaii. So they climb into the car, and Bert is with him, and she says, I don't think my friend will mind that we break in. And his friend Bert said, we'll write to the record company president, Joe Smith, and say, send lawyers and money, Joe. And Warren said, send lawyers, guns, and money.
Ah.
And he told her to turn the car around. They went back to the cocktail lounge, and he wrote the song on a cocktail napkin.
So just hearing a title just sets just boom, it was ready. He knew what he had to do, and he had to get home with her some paper quick. Yeah.
Most of his hits, his most well-known songs, were written like that. Something just with an inspiration, and then they were written in minutes. Sometimes they were co-written, sometimes they were written by himself, as that one was. But he had other songs that he labored over for years, even. He was classically trained, so he, some of his songs are very complex, beautiful, lyrically and musically.
Absolutely. And so, speaking of hits, the greatest hit of all, I mean, as far as probably the biggest hit where he broke onto the scene, is still a classic that continues to get airplay from those years. But what's the story behind Werewolves of London?
Well, Werewolves of London, the idea for the song came from Phil Everly of the Everly Brothers. Phil had been watching late-night television and watched the old 30s movie Werewolf in London, and called Warren up the next day and said, you know what? You ought to start a dance craze. It was, the days of disco and so on. And he said, you ought to start a dance craze and call it Werewolves of London, create a dance, and they laughed about it. And then we went down again to Roy Marinelle, this friend's house down in Venice, California. And he told Roy about it, and Roy had this guitar lick that he'd been saving and not knowing what to do with it. And he started playing the guitar lick, and then Waddy walked in. He was on his way somewhere, and he just stopped by, and he'd just gotten off tour in London. And he walked in, and they said, we're writing a song called Werewolves of London. And he said, you mean like, "Ow"? And they said, yeah, that's it. So they had the lick, and then Waddy kind of spouted out the first verse, and Warren did the second, and Roy did the third, and I happened to have this. I used to carry a steno pad around with me because just these moments would happen all the time, and they'd just pass unnoticed. But I tried to write them down, and I wrote that down, and that's how the song was written.
So now we know the story of the Werewolves of London, a song I haven't played ever on this show because it got so much burnout factor. But with that story Crystal told behind the story, I wanted to hear it. Hey! This is some of the great stuff on the Wind, the last Warren Zevon album. Just on this album alone, who are his friends? And these are some of the people who actually contribute these behind-the-scenes stories. Billy Bob Thornton's on this, Bruce Springsteen, David Lindley, Don Henley, Dwight Yoakam, Emmy Lou Harris, Jackson Brown, Joe Walsh, John Waite, Ry Cooder, T-Bone Burnett, Timothy Schmidt, Tom Petty, Tommy Shaw, just some, even Letterman has recorded some things with Warren Zevon. Crystal Zevon is with us and spending a few more minutes. It's been great really talking to you. You've revealed a lot of deep personal stuff, and I appreciate you going there.
Well, as I said, it wasn't easy. It was a sort of a long emotional process, but in the long run, I think I've made a lot of peace with it. So
yeah,
and Warren and I ended up as the best of friends for many years before he died. So but the awful ugly parts were there.
Well, let's take some calls here for Crystal Zevon, and you'll love the way she wrote the book in the sense that it's kind of like in transcript form, kind of like in interview form, kind of way you conducted it throughout your life when you would talk to him about the book.
Yeah.
So it's easy to read, and it kind of brings you back to the original orientate or the original time it happened. It actually brings you there. Very interesting the way you outlined it. Let's go to Brad, line 1.
Hey, how's it going?
Doing great.
All right, Kristen, I was just curious. I'm a huge Warren fan. As a matter of fact, I just had him on in my car on the way home from work, and I have some Warren Zevon tattoos, and I was just curious to hear if there was any music that hasn't been released yet that's planning on coming out in the future.
Yeah, good question.
Well, you probably know that there is an album that just came out called Preludes.
Yes, I have that. Yeah.
Okay, which was unreleased material, and yes, there actually is quite a bit. When his son Jordan went through his storage space, he found a suitcase with a lot of hundreds of tapes. Warren used to tape, while he was writing. So, a lot of them are songs that never were released or were never finished or were, maybe became another song, and we know the other song that it became.
Right.
And you hear little beginnings of it. So it's pretty interesting. You get to hear the evolution of a song. But so, there is definitely talk about actually a double album of unreleased material coming out.
Thank you very much.
One question I want to ask you, Brad, as a fan, what are the songs, especially if titles that I haven't mentioned so far, that you would like to know the story behind?
Let's see. I would have to say, I guess the "I'll Sleep When I'm Dead" song. When I was getting in my car, that's what was playing, and it's very low key. And he's just got this really nasty kind of grungy voice in it, and it just gets me really riled up.
Go ahead, Crystal.
Well, that song probably the motivation I think came out of me bugging him about coming to bed.
That's great.
And I think we had a fight, and he said, but then he came up with the phrase, and that evolved then over a period of time, but yeah, once he had the phrase, that stuck. Yeah.
All right, Brad. Listen, this book. You've got to see this book. You'll love it. I'm Sleep When I'm Dead: The Dirty Life and Times of Warren Zevon.
I will get it tomorrow or have it on order.
All right, Brad. Great talking to you. Have a good weekend.
You do the same. Take care, Crystal.
Thank you for calling.
Yes, well, bye. Crystal, I really appreciate you being on and letting me get into the sad and personal stuff, but that's the stuff that he wrote about. That's the stuff that's real. All these stories have All these songs have a story behind the story. Crystal Zevon, check out her website. She has a blog. You can email her and all that. CrystalZevon.com. CrystalZevon.com. Thanks for taking time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.